Good morning and welcome to Arsenal Domination, where the transfer window has slammed shut a few hours ago and Arsenal have not done any business at all. I'm going to just talk about some of the reasons behind why it's reported Arsenal didn't do any of this in this video, and then give my conclusions on it. But just straight up from the top, I will say that I think this is a huge risk and I am disappointed, if unsurprised, by the way Arsenal have approached this window. But let's go through the reasoning that has been reported from Arsenal from various reputable journalists, to be fair. The first one cited is that Arsenal will only go into the market for the right player. We hear this a lot from Arsenal. And I know it frustrates some, but I actually think that is the right approach that Arsenal are taking. And I would back them on the approach to not just sign anyone, but just to find the right player. I think the only sort of time I can think of in the last couple of years where they have rushed a signing is Raheem Sterling. But at least that was a loan. And I'm less worried when we rush a signing on a loan deal because the financial outlay is much less and the risk is much lower, because if they don't work for whatever reason, they can return to their parent club at the end of the loan spell. When you make permanent signings, that has a significant impact in terms of financial outlay, but also you're stuck with a player that you then struggle to move on. I think back to sort of the Emery era, end of Wenger era. We had a lot of players come in that, weren't of the right calibre and were difficult to move on high wages, and ultimately sort of led to contracts being cancelled or significant losses being made on the player. Arsenal generally, with this strategy, have got it right in the last few years. They really have. The only real notable permanent miss that I would say is Fabio Vieira. It doesn't mean that all the others have worked. I don't sort of look at transfers in success or failure outright. I think there are sort of levels of it, and I think you also have to factor in what they were bought for, rather than just are they a superstar or are they not, because actually not every player is bought to be a superstar, because that's not how things work. So I can understand that approach. I don't necessarily think it was the right one for this window, and I'll come on to that in a minute, but I can understand the approach. The other reason cited is that they tried to sign some players and they didn't want to leave, or a deal couldn't be struck. I'm going to just park the deal couldn't be struck because I do think there is another factor to that one. But in terms of players not wanting to leave, I think the obvious one there is Benjamin Sesko. I think that was a striker they wanted in this window. I suspect that will be the one they will go after in the summer. And look, that happens. It does happen. You have to go down your list. So I think we had to be careful on this one where we criticise a club for this one, because people are complaining about the signing of Mikel Moreno in the summer. Arsenal wanted Martin Zubimendi. They couldn't get Martin Zubimendi and they went down their list, similar to the way they did when they brought Trossard in. Which ultimately, for Trossard, was a right deal. But you're not necessarily going to get, if you don't get your top target, the quality of what you get is not necessarily there. And I think Mikel Moreno, will improve in time. I don't think he's going to be a superstar by any means. But secondly, I think they sort of recognise that, look, this isn't the player they want. He'll ultimately be a squad player, but he's replacing one of the squad players in Thomas Partey or Jorginho that are leaving this summer, and Arsenal did that business early. But ultimately, if players don't want to come, they don't want to come, and you shouldn't force that. But I also think there's the FFP issue. Now, people don't like this as a reason and an excuse, but the rules are rules, and I think Arsenal, while they're compliant, I think are in a position where spending was limited. I've always said that I think there were players available they could get, but we weren't going to be able to trigger a release clause for, say, Victor Gyökeres. Because it's a one hit on your FFP PSR. Similarly, I think that it means that you are going to have to structure deals which the selling club may not want to agree to. And from Arsenal's point of view, they won't want to significantly overpay for a player just to make the structure work. And I think that does complicate it. So I think all of Arsenal's reasons there and the logic behind it are relatively sound. I think that is the right model for building a successful football club, and one that has stood them well. But, and I think this is really important to remember, I think in this window, Arsenal kind of had to break some of their rules around this. They obviously can't break the FFP rule, but I think they may well have or should have looked to try and overpay slightly. And I don't say that often because I think the consequences of overpaying are quite significant because it does impact what you can do in future transfer windows. But I think this was a needs must because while winning the Premier League is going to be quite tight, I think Liverpool are vulnerable. And I think if you can get in that extra forward, particularly with the injuries and the amount of minutes that particularly Kai Havertz has played and the lack of options that we do have despite the emergence of Wanyeri, I think it's a huge risk. And I think you are basically saying, we're not going to go for this, we're just going to hope. Whereas I think a new arrival, let's say it was Ollie Watkins for 70, 75 million. Do I think he's worth it? No. But it gives you a chance. I think it lifts the squad and it just gives you a chance to rotate some minutes around. Or even, take Victor Gyökeres. Could you go and go, do you know what? We're not going to pay you 60 million release clause. We're going to give you 80, but here's a structured deal. Now, maybe those discussions happened. I don't know. We don't know. Arsenal are very secretive around these things. But I do think that was a risk worth taking in this window from Arsenal perspective to try and get a trophy that they desperately want and need over the line because of the numbers. But there were also other options. Matthias Tel was available on loan, straight loan, no obligation to buy. And I think, do I think he would be the answer? We don't know. He's 19, he's raw, never played in the Premier League, not got that much minutes this season or goals. But he is a player that can play across the front line. And he could be that sort of what I think we bought Raheem Sterling for, which is just to take the pressure off and hopefully chip in with a few goals. Sterling hasn't done that to date, granted, but it's that sort of thing where, I got the logic of a Sterling one, because that's what it was designed to do. Can you chip in with 5 to 10 goals, assists, and take some of the pressure off? Tel could be another sort of attempt at that, keeping the powder dry for the summer. So I really just think that Arsenal could have found some business in the window. I still genuinely think that Mbeumo out of Brentford would have been a really nice option. We don't know what Arsenal think, of course. If they don't like him, they're not going to sign him. But I think that was a gettable transfer. I think you could probably go, do you know what, Brentford, we're going to give you 50, 55 million for Mbeumo. You're safe. You're staying up. He's not going to be worth that in the summer. And I think you could get him. And I think Mbeumo would want to come. He can play off the right. He can play as a number 9 if needed. I think he becomes a squad player and he doesn't preclude the business. And I think, as I say, the fact that we're leaving our title chances to pure luck now, and hoping that we don't get further injuries up front, and we're hoping that Bukayo Saka comes back early, is a huge risk and one that we shouldn't be taking. I also think that, unlike the summer, where I don't think there were a significant number of good options in the summer available, and you could sort of see that with the business at Manchester City or Liverpool and other big clubs around Europe, the top clubs didn't do a lot of business in the summer. I think that was slightly different in this window, and I think that's what makes it disappointing. Those 3 factors of leaving the title to chance, players being there, and not really taking that risk is really disappointing. And I really feel that the club, and I think it's on the recruitment staff here, I think it's Jason Ito that ultimately has to take responsibility for this, hasn't done enough to support Mikel Arteta and hasn't done enough to support the fans. I know some people are saying it's the Kroenkes. They showed willing that they were going to put money in for Ollie Watkins if that was who Arsenal wanted, and they have consistently, to be fair, put money into the club for transfers within the sort of rules that Arsenal must stick to. I hope I'm wrong on this. I hope it doesn't turn out to be a disappointment, come May, and that we have, trophies in the bag. I mean, if we could turn around Newcastle, we're in a final, you never know, but that looks difficult. Champions League, I'm not quite sure we're quite there yet. And the Premier League, we've got to catch up a point on Liverpool. And, as I say, not doing business now leaves that to chance. And I'm afraid, Arsenal, you have let us all down, but I hope I'm wrong. Anyway, that's enough for me. Hopefully, it's been quite sort of a balanced review of everything that sort of goes into it, because I do think it's not just as black and white, as simple as some people are making it out to be. I think there are areas of grey and some nuance to it that hopefully I've addressed in this video. But ultimately, my conclusion is the same as many other Arsenal fans out there. It wasn't good enough. And, you know, that's disappointing to say. Anyway, I will speak to you all soon. Have a great day. Thanks. Bye.